What's going on, everybody? Khalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the OnePlus Nord N20 5G. Now, this phone is the successor to the OnePlus Nord N10 5G that came out around mid-2021, and so far, based on my first impression, I would say it's definitely a worthy successor. So I'm going to be going over everything you need to know about this phone to help you decide whether or not it's the right one for you. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button because I will be making plenty of videos about this phone in the near future. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, this phone has a really nice display. At 6.43 inches, it's not the biggest out there, but it's definitely big enough to give you a good experience if you're doing something like streaming videos, or maybe reading or playing a game, and in general, things are going to be decently large and pretty easy to see. Now, in addition to just being decently large, this display also has pretty good dimensions. With an aspect ratio of 20:9, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor, so if you're doing something in landscape mode like streaming a video or playing a game, you're going to get a more immersive experience, and things are going to look nicer in general. And then if you're doing something like reading an article, browsing the web, or scrolling through social media, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. Aside from the size and dimensions, the display has really good quality as well. This is actually an AMOLED display, which isn't really uncommon for this price range, but at the same time, the vast majority of phones around this price usually have IPS LCD technology, which on one hand isn't really bad per se, but on the other hand, an AMOLED is a whole different level, and with this kind of display, the colors are going to look a lot nicer, and you're also going to get better brightness and viewing angles as well. This, of course, is going to make your content consumption experience a lot better no matter what you're doing. And in addition to this, if you're outside a lot in the sun, this type of display is a lot easier to see than something like an IPS LCD. And if that wasn't enough, we're also getting a 1080p resolution here with a PPI of 409, so the image in general is going to be real sharp and crisp. So overall, whether you're consuming a lot of content or you're just on your phone a lot using social media and browsing the web, you really can't go wrong with a good display, and for this price range, the OnePlus Nord N20 5G is one of the best. Now, this phone is getting 128 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, pretty average for this price range. There's some phones out there with 64 and some with 256, but 128 gigabytes is really a solid amount of internal storage, and for the average user, you're probably not even going to need a microSD card. To give you an idea of what the storage actually looks like, right now I have pretty much everything you might use on a daily basis, stuff like social media, streaming platforms, and then a few games here and there, but nothing really crazy, and everything combined, including the system, is taking up 36 gigabytes. So as you can see here, there's a lot of space available. Now, this shows two different things. On one hand, the average user probably isn't going to need more than 128 gigabytes, but on the other hand, imagine if this phone only had 64. I mean, the system alone is taking up 13.4 gigabytes, and if this phone had half the storage, then we of course would have a lot less space available. So sure, if you're a really light user and you don't really do a whole lot with your phone, then 64 gigabytes would probably be okay. And of course, if you're a power user and you have like 100 gigabytes of apps or something like that, then you might need 256, but again, for most people, 128 gigabytes is the perfect amount of internal storage. And remember, this phone also does have microSD card expansion, so if you have a bunch of photos and videos, for example, you can always offload those to save even more space. Now, this phone has both a fingerprint scanner and face unlock, so we're getting two different options to unlock it. Definitely a nice thing. The fingerprint scanner is located in the display and looks real nice and modern, and I've always been a fan of this kind of fingerprint scanner. Sure, it's not the most practical when compared to having it on the power key, for example, but it looks so much nicer and more premium, and it really goes with the modern design of this phone. And as far as functionality goes, it does work really well. In fact, it's probably one of the faster in-display fingerprint scanners I've seen in this price range. So if you want a fingerprint scanner that not only looks nice, but also works really well, then you're definitely not going to be disappointed here. And don't forget, this phone also does have face unlock as well, so if you don't want to use the fingerprint scanner for whatever reason, you can always use that instead. Now, aside from the disappointment of not having an ultra-wide camera, this phone does have a pretty nice camera setup. We got a hole punch for the front-facing camera, it's off to the side here, and depending on your wallpaper, you might not even be able to see it at all. I definitely like this a lot better than the water drop notches that tend to be a little bit more intrusive, and just like the in-display fingerprint scanner, the design of this camera really fits with the modern vibe of the phone. Now, this camera is 16 megapixels, and as you can see from this test photo here, it does take pretty good pictures, and portrait mode works pretty well too. Sure, it's not quite as good as a $1,400 Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, for example, but for a budget phone, it will get the job done. Now on the back here, we got a triple camera setup. Like I said, no ultra wide camera unfortunately, which is a pretty big disappointment considering most phones in this price range do have that feature, but we do have a 64 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So again, despite not having an ultra wide camera, the rest of the camera setup is pretty good. To give you a general idea of what this camera can do, here's a photo taken with the main camera. Now sure, it's not DSLR quality, and compared to something like an iPhone 13 Pro Max or a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, etc., it's not going to be quite at that level either. But again, for a budget phone, it does definitely get the job done. Now here's a couple photos taken with the macro camera. I'm not too impressed, especially considering you can get something like a Samsung Galaxy A33 5G that also has a macro camera, but takes much better pictures with it, and they're around the same price. So in general, if this is an important feature for you, yeah, on one hand, this phone does have it, but even for this price range, it's not the best out there. Now for video, this phone has a max recording quality of 1080p at 30 frames per second in both the rear and front cameras, so nothing really impressive here, which is too bad. Sure, the vast majority of phones in this price range can't record videos in 4K, but seeing that OnePlus phones tend to be a little bit more premium, I was hoping this one would be kind of an exception. But to give you an idea of what the recording quality looks like, I'm going to show you a quick video sample. So here's a test video with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G. We are recording in 1080p right now, which is the max quality. Also keep in mind what the audio sounds like. Autofocus is a little slow, but it does work. Now keep in mind, this phone has a lot of different camera features and some do work better than others, so if you want to see a more in-depth analysis of the camera, be sure to subscribe to the channel because I will be making a dedicated camera review for this phone as well. But I would say in general, unless you're trying to record really high quality videos or use an ultra-wide camera, the setup we have here with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G is going to be at least good enough for most people. Now with this phone, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. Now aside from this just being a really good processor on paper, I would say from my experience, the OnePlus Nord N20 5G is one of the faster phones in this price range. Whether you're doing stuff like browsing the web, using social media, streaming stuff like videos and music, or playing games, everything runs really smoothly on this phone, and so far I haven't had any performance issues. Now that being said, remember at the end of the day, this is still a mid-range phone, so it's not going to be nearly as fast as the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra for example, but as far as mid-range phones go, there's a certain level where having a phone that's a little bit faster is not really going to make a huge difference, and I do think the OnePlus Nord N20 5G is really around that level. So while there are some mid-range phones around this price range that are a little bit more powerful, unless you go all the way up to flagship level, you're probably not going to notice the difference a whole lot. So in general, if you're looking for a 5G phone with great performance and you don't want to spend $1,400 on a flagship phone, the OnePlus Nord N20 5G is a great choice. Now I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and here are the results for that test. What I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and comparing your scores to these to see whether or not this phone would actually be an upgrade for you, because depending on what you have, it may or may not be. If you're coming from an entry-level phone or maybe even another mid-range phone, there's a good chance this phone is going to be quite a bit faster, but if you're coming from something like an older flagship phone, for example, maybe a Samsung Galaxy S10, then this phone might actually be a downgrade. So definitely run this test and compare the results so you can be sure. Now for the battery, this phone is pretty impressive. With a 4500 mAh battery, it's not the biggest out there, but it's still decently good. You're definitely going to get through the day and probably even multiple days depending on how you actually use your phone. And what's even better with this phone is it has 33-watt fast charging, and in situations where you don't have a lot of time to charge your phone, this is going to make a huge difference. Compared to other phones out there, in this specific price range, fast charging tends to be somewhere between 10 and 15 watts, sometimes 18, and a little bit above this price range with stuff like the higher end Samsung Galaxy A series phones, for example, you start to see around 25 watts, and that continues into flagship phones. So 33-watt fast charging, while still not being the most powerful in the world, is still definitely impressive, especially for a mid-range phone like this. Now as far as software goes, this is one area where I do think it's a little bit of a weakness for this phone. Right now we're currently on Android 11, which is not even the latest version of Android. Now I'm hoping that since this is a mid-range OnePlus phone, we're at least going to get one major update at some point in the future, but seeing that this phone is already behind, if it's important to you to get the latest version of Android as it comes out, then you're probably going to want to look at a different device that has better updates. But on the bright side, Android 11 isn't really a bad software per se, and it does run decently well on this phone, so if you're not too concerned with having the newest version of Android, it should be okay. Now this phone also does have NFC, so if you like to make mobile contactless payments using Tap and Pay, then you'll be happy to know you can do that with this phone no problem. As far as the overall design goes, I am a really big fan. This phone looks real nice and modern, and it has great build quality too. It doesn't feel like it's gonna fall apart at all. In fact, it feels really sturdy and high quality, and in general, a lot more premium than it actually is. I really have no complaints here. The back has a nice looking matte material that doesn't pick up fingerprints too badly, and the cameras are also pretty unique. It's not every day you have a phone with two giant cameras on the back, so that's pretty cool too. The materials also feel decently premium. The phone is made entirely of plastic, but it feels like a really high quality plastic, and definitely not cheap by any means. In addition to this, the phone has some decent weight to it, and this is going to add to that more premium higher end feel. But in conclusion, my general thoughts about the OnePlus Nord N20 5G. Honestly, I don't have many complaints about this phone. It has a great display, a ton of storage, a pretty good camera, and a really powerful processor. It also has 5G connectivity, great fast charging, and features like NFC. Off the top of my head, the only bad things I can really think of are first of all the software. Android 13 is right around the corner, and this phone has Android 11, which obviously is not even the latest current version of Android. So if it's important to you to get the latest Android as it comes out, then this phone is not going to be a good choice for you. Aside from that, it's pretty disappointing that this phone doesn't have an ultra-wide camera, seeing that most phones in this price range do. And the video recording quality, while not being the worst out there, is definitely not the best either. So if you're recording lots of videos that you want to use for something like YouTube, for example, then this phone is probably not going to be great for that either. Now, I'm sure I'm going to find a lot more complaints about this phone as I use it more, some more nitpicky than others, but I will be making a dedicated video about all the negatives to this phone in the near future. So if you want to see that, definitely subscribe to the channel because this is coming. But in general, if you're looking for a mid-range 5G phone with great features and all-around performance, a really high-quality display, plenty of storage, and a good camera, then the OnePlus Nord N20 5G is going to be a great choice. But this concludes my review of the OnePlus Nord N20 5G. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button, and stay tuned because I will be making plenty of videos about this phone in the near future. But that's it for this video. Don't forget to follow Kalipas Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next one.